Welcome to another episode of Unworldly Encounters with Mike and Brian. Brian, how you doing today, bud?
I'm doing great, man. That's a solid Sunday. Ready to talk about our next topic, maybe do a little recap.
Yeah, sounds good. So we have a special one for all of our listeners today. As you guys know, our last episode was on Travis Walton, and we had a fan submission from Tyler. Well, I was able to get Tyler here. So Tyler, he wrote in the fan submission last episode. He wanted us to do Travis Walton, which we provided our take on Travis Walton and his abduction. And so now I'm going to introduce Tyler. Tyler, how you doing today, bud?
Nice to be on the cast here.
Thanks for being here,
you guys. Appreciate it. Ready to talk about some aliens.
All right, but before we get into that, most importantly, what's your weapon of choice today, Brian?
Today I'm doing a little Jackie O's off-duty lifeguard.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Off-duty lifeguard. All right. Well, I'm just gonna kick it old school. I'm gonna do an all-day IPA this morning.
Solid.
Tyler, what do you got going on?
Well, I think I'm going to kick it Travis style and go with some Busch Light.
Ooh, Busch Latte.
Latte.
I dig the Busch Latte. All right, Tyler. Give us a little background. Like, are you into extraterrestrial beings, UFOs, or is this like a hobby that you get into, or is it just something that you like to listen to every once in a while? Are you a believer? You kind of an in-betweener?
Yeah, I would say I'm interested in that extraterrestrial, UFO, even the paranormal stuff. I'll listen to a lot of different podcasts, a lot of different shows, documentaries. It's pretty interesting stuff. Some of it I do believe, some of it I don't. Some of it I feel that you could easily debunk or prove that it's not so true. Yeah, so I think I'm kind of that in-betweener type.
All right, no, that's fair. So why the submission, why Travis Walton? Why did you want us to look at his case?
Well, I feel Travis is probably the most well-known abduction case, but also probably the most that people are on the fence with. Like, hey, this guy, he's kind of hit and miss, and is it a money grab? Is it, something along those lines? So I thought that would be a good discussion for you guys to go over, see your opinions on it.
Yeah, and I really appreciated the letter. I thought it was really cool.
It.
Yeah, and obviously it's and I think what I hope is during my research I brought out information that most people may not even have known, especially some of the backstory when it came to the contract and some of the stuff leading up to the actual abduction. So I really hope that the listeners, they picked up maybe some new information from that. Is there anything from our episode that made you question, or did it pretty much fall in line with what you were thinking?
I think for me, I didn't research it as much as you guys did, so I didn't know as much in the backstory. The one thing that kind of turned me more so into being more skeptical on his take is the whole Benny and Betty Hill scenario, where I believe it was his brother-in-law, or was it Mike, that mentioned to him that they had a discussion over it maybe a month before. And that really threw me like, oh, okay, this guy's kind of seen an opening into making something believable.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was like a key part of the entire case, really, is if you think, because again, it goes back to how many coincidences equals a coincidence.
I think we talked last night and we decided 6.
Yes.
What was the 6?
6 is the legit amount.
Well, we definitely need our listeners to write in and
Still want to hear. What's
I
the
do.
magic number?
I really do. I want to know how many coincidences it takes for it to be a coincidence. So, to all of our listeners out there, please let us know what your thoughts are. But yeah, I mean, it's like you get into that case and you really start when you take a deeper dive and you start peeling the layers of the onion, and you there's just, leading up, like there's money issues, obviously. And I did research the estimated net worth of Travis Walton now, and it's around 1.5 million. So he's definitely making, that's not a logger's salary, right? I mean,
If it is, I'm in the wrong career.
exactly. I'm moving out west,
Yeah.
somewhere where they do a lot of logging.
Yeah.
But so how do you think the podcast went? Like, what was the most surprising to you? Was it the backstory of the money? Is it, because I know that's what you just recently alluded to here?
Yeah, I think that was the most surprising to me. I think one of the most shocking things, though, is the lie detector, with all 7 being able to pass the test. That was a shocking thing that is kind of hard to debunk or to not feel skeptical about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like Brian and I discussed before, when it comes to the lie detector, I would have had less heartburn about the lie detector had they've taken 2 separate tests with 2 different examiners, different locations, same questions, but just different examiners, right? So if you, Tyler, are the examiner and you test all 7 people and they passed, and then now Brian's the examiner, same questions, he's reading it, and they all pass, then I'm like, all right, there must be some truth there.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, to me, it's subjective.
Yeah.
And it's all in the hands of how the results are being interpreted by the examiner. Now, I would love to have someone who is a polygraph examiner on the show to maybe help explain, like, is this an actual... Has he investigated that case? He or she investigated that case? What is their thoughts? Is it something that comes out like in their training as kind of like a training video or a scenario in which you have this group of people and they all pass? Is that legit? Or is there something that we're missing? Like, I would love to be able to just pick somebody's brain that's an expert in that field.
Mm-hmm. It's still not going to sway me on the determination. I don't care if they say they do pass. Right? I mean, to me, the story is still bogus. I'm not buying it. But I would be curious to hear from a professional, because I'm sure the records from the actual polygraphs exist somewhere that somebody could access and look at whatever it is you look at for that.
I'm right there with you. I'm not changing my opinion on the entire story. I just really want to have some, technical background on polygraphs.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
I mean, I know I've sat through polygraphs before, right? But I don't know how they're read. I don't know what their training is to become an examiner. But I would love to have an expert opinion on a polygraph.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially when it comes to this type of scenario, when you're dealing with, extraterrestrial beings.
Yeah.
Right? Is there a different path they take when it comes to their questioning than it would if it was a criminal investigation type thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Awesome. Is there anything else about the podcast, Tyler, that you want to chat about?
Oh no, I'm enjoying it so far. I think 2 great episodes.
Cool.
Appreciate it. All right, so we just really wanted to recap. We found out Tyler lived somewhat close, and he was willing to make the drive. So we figured, since he was the first fan letter submission, why not get him on the air and try to, get his opinion on how the podcast went, and then also let him sit in on our podcast today, which we are talking about what, Brian? This is your day.
Passing the torch over. This is a good one. I'm excited for today. I think the next couple episodes will be really good. So just a recap out of the gates. Episode 1, we talked about Bob Lazar, which for me, I think there's a lot of corroboration points for Bob, and I like his story a lot. Episode 2 is Travis Walton. So today's episode, what I want to talk about is Commander David Fravor. And we'll get into what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about his background. Then we'll talk about the incident. And where we'll end today and it'll kind of lead into the next episode, kind of back-to-back pilots. So David Fravor saw something in the air, and then next week I want to talk about Ryan Graves and what he saw in the air. And then I think that'll probably logically lead us to David Grush and his congressional testimony, which actually included David Fravor and Ryan Graves.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I did a little bit of my own research on Commander here.
Yeah, I'd expect nothing less.
So get into it, man. And we'll,
right.
Tyler and I will start.
Yeah. Well, let's start with who is David Fravor? So David Fravor, 24 years of military service, 18 of those as a Navy pilot, 5 tours to the Persian Gulf starting after Desert Storm. He's got over 4,000 hours of flight time in an F-18. And at the time of this incident, he was the commanding officer of VA-41, which is the Black Aces, which that means he had 12 planes and about 330 people. And I think the one cool piece is he also attended Top Gun. So a little bit of Tom Cruise built into this guy, although I can't see this guy playing beach volleyball, but maybe, you know?
Yeah, I know, right? And the cool thing about this guy, too, is, I mean, he said that he's got pretty much every certification that you can get when it comes to flying, right? But you missed one of the most important pieces of his background.
Hit me.
He was a Marine as well.
There you go.
So
there you go.
That's the most, to all my Marines out there.
Leave it to you.
Semper Fi, brothers and sisters. Yeah.
Good. So that's the background on Fravor. Let's talk the incident. So time frame we're talking about is 2004, November. And they are off the coast of San Diego, about 60 miles west. They're doing workups for their next deployment. They got 2 aircraft carriers in the area. David Fravor is working off the USS Nimitz, and they've also got the Princeton out there. David, again, is over charge of the Black Aces group. And this is the workup that they're doing is for a deployment to the Persian Gulf. So at the time of this incident, they had been out to sea for about 2 weeks. And the day of the incident, they were scheduled to lead a 2 versus 2 air training exercise. And this is all F-18s. And the way that they do these workups, which I didn't really know about until hearing from him, and it's kind of cool. It's like the classic war game scenario. It's you've got a good group and you've got a bad group, and the bad group have their tactics, and the good group has to go in and execute whatever maneuvers. And that's how they train as part of the workups for deployment.
Yeah, and I think he called it like a 2v2, right? Like
That's correct.
For this specific
Yep.
training exercise, it was the Marine Corps who was going to be kind of like the red team, right? So 2 Marine pilots were going to face off against 2 Navy pilots, right?
Yep. So Fravor is scheduled to launch from the Nimitz, and the other team is launching from the Princeton. Fravor takes off first, but upon launch, the Princeton radioed in that they were going to cancel the training exercise. And the reason that they were going to cancel the training exercise is that the Princeton wanted them to investigate radar targets that, unbeknownst to Fravor, they had been seen for the 2 weeks that they had already been out to sea, but this hasn't been relayed to pilots. What they told Fravor and the crew, his other pilot and his 2 versus 2, it's just his team of 2, that they had these radar targets that were dropping from 80,000 feet to 20,000 feet. And this was west of their combat air patrol point, which is about 40 miles south of the ship. So they said, hey guys, and keep in mind when the Princeton says, hey, we want you to go check this out. This is a training exercise. They have no live weapons, right? So they're armed with nothing. And hearing Fravor talk about this, what they had assumed these targets were, first of all, they assumed probably some junk radar data, guessing this is probably some kind of illicit drug activity with people running drugs in airplanes.
Yeah, because where they're at, I mean, Mexico.
Not shocking.
Right. Not shocking at all.
So David and his wingman cruise out to go check out what these things are. And according to David, so you're talking kind of San Diego, and according to David, this was like the quintessential San Diego day, right? Just clear blue skies, calm ocean. They're cruising out. They're about 20,000 feet. Sea is perfectly blue. And as they come up towards this point where the radar was showing this object, they notice disturbance in the water. And what they see down in the water, the way that Fravor describes it is he's like, imagine looking out to the ocean, you see a rock close to the surface and you see white water washing over the rock. And he says that is what they see. And the object beneath the ocean is roughly the size of a 747, according to him. But he says it's shaped like a cross. But what's interesting, and this is kind of where the story kicks in, is above the water, flipping back and forth is what he describes as a tic-tac. And he describes the tic-tac based on his observation point as about 40 feet long. And the tic-tac was kind of, if you imagine the cross, the tic-tac was going north-south, and then it would rapidly move east-west and would just move back and forth. And they were
like a ping pong.
Not even a ping pong, just rotating on its axis rapidly. And they were kind of confused at what it was they were looking at. So David tells his wingman, hey, you hang out at 20,000 feet. I'm going to spiral down and get a closer look at whatever this is we're looking at, because one of the things that they had theorized is this some kind of helicopter, and we're seeing like rotor wash down close to the ocean surface. So David takes this, what he kind of describes, and I'm not familiar with the military tactics, so hearing him talk about it's interesting. They take a spiraled approach down to drop in elevation. He was like, one of the hard things about operating out at sea is when you get down close to the ocean, it's hard to tell the difference between the sky and the sea, and you can get too close too fast.
Right.
So they take this spiral down kind of approach. The entire time, both planes are keeping an eye visual on this whatever is submerged, and then the tic-tac above that's randomly moving north, south, east, west. As he's spiraling down, I think he says he gets to about, I think it was like 15,000 feet. And the tic-tac was doing the same motion north, south, east, west above this object. And then the tic-tac notices Fravor, according to Fravor, coming down in the spiral pattern. The tic-tac bolts up to 12,000 feet and starts mimicking Fravor. So the way that Fravor describes it, if you think of a clock, like when Fravor's at noon, the tic-tac is at 6.
Right.
And as Fravor's going down, the tic-tac is coming up, almost as like an intersection. So Fravor says, hey, wingman, do you see this? And they're like, yep, they're up at 20,000 feet. These guys are down 15-ish. As he notices the tic-tac starting to follow his pattern, he's like, well, I'm going to cut the circle. Closest line between 2 points is a straight line. So he dives into the circle to head directly at this object. And as he gets his nose on this object and starts to drop down, because it's still about 3,000 feet down, the object starts coming towards Fravor. But when he gets about, and the way he describes it, about halfway through the clock, if you're talking noon and 6 to intersect, the tic-tac disappears. He doesn't see it. He calls to the wingman, hey, that thing just disappeared. Do you guys have it? Nope, we have nothing. 30 seconds go by, and he's like, hey, whatever. Let's check out what the thing in the water was. They look down. The thing in the water's gone. There's nothing there.
So that was where I was going to ask, because I made a note. I did not see, I could not find anywhere where it talks about if the military went out to that 10-digit grid where that cross-like object was in the sea with all of our technology to investigate, is there something sitting at the bottom of the ocean that comes up, and is it like a refueling something for, is there something in the ocean that these craft need for, you know what I mean? Like why, what is that object? Did they go, couldn't find anything that indicates that they went out and did any further research. Now, not saying they didn't. I'm just saying I couldn't find it.
Well, I think what's interesting, and you'll hear Fravor talk about this, and next week when we talk about Graves, they both say the same thing. They're preparing for deployment. Like, we don't know when we're operating in these spaces, is this a UFO or is this some kind of military black ops project? Because they would operate in the same space, but if they were, you would think that they would communicate back and forth, hey, you need to be careful with what you're doing. The other thing that he said that I thought's interesting is they're not there to investigate this stuff. They're there to train for their deployment, whatever their mission is. So this is very much a secondary, not even a concern. It's more of, what is this while we're out here? Let's check it out.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly what they call a real world vector.
Yeah.
is what they got
Yes.
transitioned into. So I was just trying to, and they went out there with no weapons and stuff like that. But there was another thing too that I caught when I was watching it, is talking about like a merge plot of some sort on the radar, right? So once you get into a certain area, the way I remember it, like once our planes got into a certain radius of the UFO, it became a merge plot. So they couldn't identify friend from foe at that point, right? Because it's just like a big blob.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because it's an interesting point. So what you're talking about on the merge point that's what would be coming from the Nimitz and the Princeton. So they have, think of it as like a broadband radar. Like we can see 250 miles out, but within maybe a square mile radius, it's only a single dot, regardless of how many craft, whatever that may be in there. However, when you're in the airplane, it's got its own set of devices that's keeping track of things. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things, and I was going to get into this, but let's talk about it now since we're talking about radar issues, is one of the things that Fravor said. Now, granted, he doesn't have weapons on the craft, but the systems that would deploy the weapons are still there. So all the tracking mechanisms.
Right.
Whatever this object was had active radar jam on Fravor. So even if he wanted to target it for a weapons solution, it wasn't going to happen because this thing was jamming his signal.
Which they said, which I did not know, but if you're actively jamming a U.S. military radar of any
it's an act of war.
It's an act of war, which I had no idea. I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's scary. Like, so or now you're like, okay, so do the aliens know that's an act of war? Are these friendly or are they foes?
So let's dive a little deeper into this, because this is where this story gets kind of interesting. So we have active radar jamming, which is interesting. Active war or not, there's intelligent control against our systems in play. But keep in mind, taking a step back to the story, so Fravor's cutting across the clock circle, call it, to intercept this tic-tac. The tic-tac vanishes. He checks with his wingman. Hey, do you see it? No. Check on the object in the ocean. We don't see it. 30 seconds later, this object appears at their cap point, which that's their combat air patrol point, which is 40 miles away. Or 40 miles south of the ship, 60 miles away from where they currently were. So that's in a 30-second period, this object, two things, traveled to their cap point. How did the object know where their cap point was? It's a GPS altitude and lat long. And it traveled there in 30 seconds. So I like science, I like math, I like nerdy stuff. So this is an easy math problem. So in order for an object to travel 60 miles in 30 seconds, you have to travel 3,600 miles per hour, which is faster than the speed of sound. Now, you may say, okay, that's an irrelevant number, put it in context. Well, for context, the SR-71, which is currently the fastest plane that we're at least aware of, its top speed is 2,534 miles per hour. So that's a delta of 1,000 miles per hour.
But the other thing you got to keep in mind too, so the plane, like our planes, go from point A to point B, and they can't just stop and hover. The vehicle we're talking about, the UFO, was just hovering, like defying gravity at 20,000 feet, right? It was just hovering there. It was like stationary, and to your point, there was no propulsion. They couldn't see any type of rotor wash or jet engine or anything. It was just hovering.
Yeah.
And then just disappears.
So that's an interesting point. So Fravor and his wingman, they're just doing all visuals.
Right.
They have them on their systems, but they have no way to record anything. So when this object then appears at the cap point, and I thought this was helpful to understand too, because I didn't really know how long can you be in an F-18 in air. Now, it depends on what you're doing, if you're doing maneuvers, whatever, but call it an hour to an hour and a half. So Fravor's been up for a while. They circle back. They land on the carrier. They land. Fravor, and keep in mind, Fravor is the commanding officer. He's the CO of this group. The next group going up has a targeting pod on their plane, which Fravor and his wingmen did not have. He was like, hey, explains the situation. Here's what's going on. The weapons system officer in the other plane says, I'm going to grab this thing because I've got the targeting pod. So the next group goes up, they find this thing, and this is where the famous Tic Tac video comes into play, because that is the video that was collected from the second group up after Fravor of this object, and that was using the targeting pod to capture this. And again, what's interesting about this is 2004, so technology, especially for the military, advances rapidly. So we're talking 20 years ago at this point. So the video that you see from the targeting pod available online, and it reminds me of what you're talking about. You're talking infrared. You would see expulsion of the gases from whatever method of propulsion. If it wasn't, you would see rotor wash from a helicopter. You can see cold, you can see hot. The object was hotter than the background that it was being filmed against, and that's the video.
Which was open sky.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's hard for me as being an in-betweener to really dispute any of this stuff, right? I mean, for one, you've got a high-ranking military officer, right, who clearly knows how to operate a plane and what other aerial vehicles look like and how they are supposed to respond and act in the sky, right? So if he's taken back by what he's seen, who am I to
And this is a dude who is launched and in air on 9/11, right? He is the one that they were putting up in the air to trust the well-being. At that time, I think he was based out of San Diego, flying around. So you're in a $30+ million government plane protecting the country because we put that level of trust in you. So the story coming from him, and again, we've talked in the past, like Bob Lazar, what's the corroborating evidence? What can you tell me that substantiates your story? Like Travis Walton, okay, we've got the lie detector. What's the corroborative evidence for David Fravor's case? Well, you've got David's story, you've got his wingman's story, who, by the way, they went and did 60 Minutes together. That's publicly available. Fascinating story. And then you've got the targeting pod video of this, whatever this thing is that looks like a Tic Tac.
Yeah.
So you got a couple lines of evidence. So I want to take one more step forward on this because I think it's interesting and it'll push us into our next few conversations that we're going to have. So, I appreciated David Fravor talking about this part because I think it's important and lends a little more credence to his story. So Fravor lands, these guys come back, they get the video. Fravor talks about going into their media room to look at this thing. And in my mind, it's like, when do the men in black show up to confiscate everything? So again, keep in mind, this is 2004. No one ever talks to David Fravor or the wingman about the incident.
This is the part that blew my fucking mind.
It just happens. And they get so much shit. Word spreads amongst the carrier.
Right.
They put out a comic making fun of Fravor, the wingman.
Right.
They, on the movies for the carrier for the week, it's like Men in Black, Mars Attacks, just poking fun at these dudes, right? Because
Which is expected.
Yeah, they're mocking him because it's BS. But what's interesting, so 2004, so fast forward 5 years, no one's contacted Fravor, no one's contacted his wingman to do any kind of investigation until 2009. And Fravor gets hit up by Jay Stratton, who's part of ATIP, which ATIP is Anomalous Threat Identification Program, which is a program that's led at the time by Lou Elizondo. So Lou Elizondo's name's been in the news a lot here recently. That was the first time, so a 5-year gap, that anyone had talked to Fravor or his wingman about this incident. Tell us more about the incident. So that was in 2009. Elizondo quits ATIP in 2016, and in December of 2017, I think this is kind of a landmark change in the UFO landscape. Elizondo helps get published the New York Times article that admits that the U.S. government was looking into UFOs. And what's interesting is interviews in 2009, nothing comes out. Elizondo quits and kind of is the first unofficial whistleblower. David Grush is the real whistleblower because the Protection Act was in place. But Elizondo is the first one saying, I'm doing all this work, nothing's coming out of it. This is BS. He joins Going to the Stars Academy, the one with the Blink 182 guy.
No idea.
It's not MUFON or anything along those.
No, it's going to the Stars Academy. Anyway, he joins that group along with Christopher Mellon and some other folks. And that's how these videos get released. The New York Times article comes out. One of the things detailed in that article is David Fravor's case. And it kind of lays it out to the public. And the New York Times is a pretty big publication. A lot of people read that, and a lot of people put some credence behind it. And it was a former government employee saying, hey, we're doing some stuff that's a little sketchy. Here's the details on it. You make up your own mind.
Yeah, it was just a little shocking to me that, no one had spoke to him or anyone on his crew. Because for one, like once one person knows on a ship, to his point, now 5,000 people know after 30 minutes, right? The old rumor mill, the telephone game, right? Like I tell you something and then you tell them, and time it gets to the end, it's so out of whack from the initial story. So you would have thought that they would want to kind of squash some of that, say, hey, like we're not talking about that. But there was nothing. Like no one tried to end his career. No one tried to, you know what I mean? Like if you think of some of the cases that we've looked at, like they were career ending or even potentially life ending to some because they were too close to something. Well, now you've got something on video that's unexplainable, right? Especially the movements, and there's no movement. It's just crickets.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that, and one thing that we didn't talk about, are all the screens that are available to Fravor and the other pilots in an F-18. There's a multitude of screens. One of the screens they call the situational awareness screen, which is like a God's eye view of the playing field that they're engaged in. Now, that video has never been released, but because the Tic Tac video was recorded, it automatically records the situational awareness screen. Fravor himself says he's not surprised that they haven't released that because that gives too much information into our intelligence system that somebody could use for nefarious activity. But what Fravor also said is that Tic Tac wasn't alone. There were other players involved as located on that situational awareness screen, but that information's never been released. So the Tic Tac wasn't acting independently. It was part of something larger, potentially. They never engaged with these other objects. They were just radar hits.
So there was like basically another squadron of
whatever that is.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's neat, right? It's fascinating. It does make you question. And I don't see how you can be a skeptic of this. I mean, you've got factual information, right? You've got top military individuals, to your point, with video evidence, right? Like, how can you sit there and be like, oh, that's a bunch of bullshit?
Yeah.
Like, it's on camera.
Well, and you said it earlier, and I think it's an interesting point. And I'm looking forward to next week, too, when we talk about Graves, because Graves' approach to this has been the one that I think is important, which is, I don't care if these are UFOs or government black ops projects, but we have to keep our people and our property safe. These are $70 million aircraft that cost $30,000 an hour to fly. We don't want to run into something that either the government's doing as part of a different branch activity, or if these are anomalous. Either way, we need to have some kind of controls around not running into these things.
Right. And then I think he even spoke about the, so his instance 2004, then the one in 2014, which we'll talk about, I'm assuming next week.
Yeah.
Where the vehicle came close to coming in contact with one of our jets, right?
Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to that. The one thing, and we'll throw this out there as a little nugget in advance, the one thing that's interesting is Fravor's encounter was a Tic Tac, right? So called a cigar-shaped object, west coast of the United States. Next week, when we talk about Graves, the objects that we're talking about, super bizarre. The cut through that you mentioned, same thing, 2v2 flight mission. Planes are about 100 feet apart, and their waypoint to enter the training area, they get split by an object that's hovering in like 100 knot winds, so 110 miles per hour. And it's a black cube surrounded by a translucent sphere. Caused the planes to go into evasive maneuvers and land. And they were like, what the hell is this thing? Because they're always super cautious of Mylar balloons. Anything that gets sucked in can take the plane out. Right. And this thing was just hanging out in space right at their waypoint.
Yeah, next week's going to be interesting. Well, I think it's going to obviously tie really well into what we're talking about today. Yeah. Tyler, what are your thoughts so far on what Brian's been discussing?
I mean, it's hard to not find it credible. I mean, with the background and everything else that he's got. Plus, I mean, my mind thinks when he's chasing down that object and for it just to disappear, a guy with his background and how much knowledge he has, I mean, what do you think was going into his mind at that moment? An object just goes.
Oh, I'm sure he was just like, WTF, right? Like, what can you actually think other than just be kind of in disbelief? Because if you watch that video, you know, it's in the crosshairs or in the brackets of their, I don't know, FLIR system, whatever it is, right? Wherever they're calling it. And then all of a sudden it just shoots left real quick. And he couldn't really put a speed on that, you know, because they were jamming, so they couldn't get the distance, and they couldn't do, you know, that would go into the equation to determine a speed from going right to left. Mm-hmm. But the way he explained it, from the way I understood it, it was sitting stationary, right, and just.
Well, the object, it wasn't sitting stationary. The object was mimicking his spiral down. So as Fravor's spiral.
I'm talking about on the video. The one that when it was actually video.
Oh, on the video, yes. 100%. It just rockets out of there.
Yeah, and it was crazy. I mean, like, how can you not, like, okay, you can't provide any more evidence than something that's on video. And it's obviously not doctored, right? I don't think that the government would release a doctored video. All right, I'm not saying they would, but.
Yeah, the slippery slope. I don't know.
Let me rephrase that. I'm going to say on this case, there's nothing that suggests that that was doctored. Yeah. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But I would have, if they were able to give us a speed, I'm curious just to how fast was that going?
We talked about speed, right? We know if it's 60 miles away in 30 seconds, that's 3,600 miles per hour, which is faster than anything we have. We know that Tic Tac jolted that far, that fast.
Right. But again, I think it was from a stationary position, right? So it was just hovering there when they were filming that when it darted left. It wasn't moving.
You're talking about the video. I'm talking about the Fravor encounter. So two separate things, right? So the Fravor, we know the speed, give or take, 3,600 miles per hour. The video, totally separate. These guys found the Tic Tac. It's in frame, and then suddenly it's
that's what I'm saying. I would like to know how fast it moved from, stationary left out of camera, because he even stated like almost all the planes that he's aware of would have never been able to leave that screen, right? So for that to be like snap of a finger, it's gone.
If you can break the weapon system, it's not good for national defense. No, right? Like that's the big piece of this. I'll also say the one thing that I thought was kind of cool, and I think gives some more credence to Fravor. And he's told this story, and it kind of made me laugh. His mother-in-law is a big tabloid buyer, loves the UFO stories, and would always ask him, like, hey, you ever seen any UFOs? And Fravor, he doesn't seem like much of a talker. Always said no. But before the New York Times article came out, he called her, and he was like, hey, I just want you to know that I'm going to be in this New York Times article. I chased a UFO. And she's like, I knew it. I knew they were out there.
Well, it was over Thanksgiving, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like once everyone left.
Yeah.
That's, well.
It's not something to gloat about because, and you and I have talked about it, and that's why I don't love the Travis Walton case, right? Like, it's easy to make a mockery of this topic. But to your point, and I think it's a good one, why would we have not went back out to the coordinates, which we know we have, that Fravor would have collected, and do some kind of sub-ocean scan to see what's there, what's not? And again, I understand why they didn't, because they're there for mock-ups to deploy for a wartime effort. But that doesn't mean that if the government's doing their job and, this case is submitted, hey, Lou Elizondo, ATIP, here's what happened, like, aren't you going back out there and, like, investigating, checking, scanning, testing, doing something?
And that very well could have happened. We'll never know about it until maybe 20 years from now.
Well, it's almost like there's maybe some kind of operation to identify and understand these things, and maybe it's taking place and we don't know about it. Hashtag David Grush, and we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But yeah, how does this all fit together?
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing that I truly respect from the commander here, what he's talking about, is there's a sense of the American people need to know some information, right? But it's also that fine line of how much is too much information, because we don't want our adversaries to know what we know or know what we don't know.
Right.
So I do respect their take on that, right? They'll give us the information that we need to know, right? That they feel we need to know. But they're not going to overindulge either. Like, they're not going to go down rabbit holes. They're not going to be like, I don't care who's interviewing you, you're not going to get that shit out of them.
Yeah.
And I truly respect that.
Let's take a slight rabbit hole approach. So we did the math, 3,600 miles per hour for this thing darting away from Fravor to the cap point. I think one of the interesting aspects, and let's tie this back to Bob Lazar. So if Bob Lazar, what he's saying is accurate, and these craft can create their own gravitational field, their own envelope to operate in, it would make a lot of sense, because no organic being could handle the G-forces of dropping from 80,000 to 20,000 feet or moving at 3,600 miles per hour and then stopping instantaneously. You would crush whatever is in this craft unless you were able to manipulate gravity and create your own field. And then it's like you're not moving inside.
Yeah. Because you just think of a movie, right? When you see like a movie in a plane in a movie, right? When they show a lot of turbulence, whatever, and it just drops and everything lifts up, right? And then all of a sudden it comes crashing back down once it regulates. Like, so to your point, that would, if you're going from 80 to 20, whatever's in there is eating the ceiling at that point. You're just smushed.
And the other thing of it too is, so take out G-forces, the other thing that you can then kind of manipulate between is air and water. So if you're creating your own gravitational field, it doesn't matter if you're flying through air or through water. The medium's irrelevant as long as it's not a solid. You can still do all the same things because you're operating your own envelope of gravity. So if whatever the craft that was below the water, whatever these things were doing, it wouldn't matter that it's in the water because they could operate in both. If what Bob Lazar said is true and they're operating off of this gravity propulsion system.
Yeah, that's freaky to think about.
Pretty wild.
It's definitely wild.
So I think the question, based on this G-force and different fields that you can operate in, one of the questions that come up is this piloted by an organic being, or is this some kind of UAV?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I know that there's probably going to be people out there that are thinking the same thing. Is this some type of government vehicle that just no one has any a need to know on, right? Is this a vehicle, a UAV, manned, unmanned, that we have in our arsenal that only a select few people get to operate, right? But I think with this, if you go back to, what the commander was saying, was that there was no visible propulsion system. So any UAV that I've been around or that we've seen on the internet, you either have a prop or some type of like jet engine or whatnot, right? That's powering it. And I don't know of any. Now, obviously, drones can sit stationary, right? But they also have rotors that are sitting there that are manipulating, staying level and all that stuff, right? So, but there's nothing here that would indicate that this is any type of unmanned
Everything
vehicle.
We have either pushes or pulls. If it's a prop, you're pulling the airplane forward, or if it's jet, you're pushing the airplane.
Yeah, and we definitely don't have anything that can go forward and then just automatically go backwards.
Especially not at 3,600 miles per hour.
Estimated.
To a dead stop.
Estimated.
I feel pretty good on my math.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's estimated. I'm not disputing it. I'm just saying that's an educated guess.
So what do you think, Mike? You want to tie this up and wrap it together here?
Yeah, Tyler, let's start out with your thoughts, man. What do you think about this case?
I think it's one of the most valid things that there's out there right now. honestly. I mean, look at the time and the technology that was around in that point. It's hard to discredit what he's saying, and his credentials. I mean, it's all legit. To think that there's objects like that out there that are possibly not of this earth or whatever it may be, and we didn't classify this information, that's the only part that really shocks me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, overall, dude, I'm not going to try to even poke holes in this. I'm not going to, because I just think that, to your point earlier, talking about Bob Lazar and his experience, right? Like what he experienced in his stuff compared to this, I think they all align, right? And if anything, Bob's kind of coming out the winner right now, right? They drug him through the dirt for a long time, but with this stuff coming out and the things that he had said that he saw, and brought to people's attention that everyone said was a bunch of bullshit. Mm-hmm. I mean, now he's got to be doing a little dance in the kitchen while he's drinking his what did we say he was drinking?
Oh, I don't remember what we said Bob was drinking.
Well, we'll have to go back on that one.
So what are you buying this one, Mike?
No, I'm buying this one.
Yeah.
I mean, it again, if to Tyler's point, if it wasn't for the dude's credentials,
yeah,
and the video obviously helps, but then you also have 3 other, maybe more than that, pilots that was actually up there and witnessed, had eyes on. They might not have all caught video, but at least they had eyes on. That's hard to poke holes in. It's hard to say that it's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah. 4,000 hours of logged flight time, and an F-18 is a lot of time where you can see a lot of different things. One of the things that Fravor brought up too, and I didn't mention, but he was like, some people have asked me, well, was that just a submarine under the surface? And he's like, well, with 4,000 hours, he's like, once you see what a submarine looks like in the ocean, you can't mistake it for something else. He's like, this wasn't a submarine.
Yeah, because I can see where a submarine could potentially look like a cross underwater,
True.
right? So, I mean, just because it has the 2 side
and
fins, whatnot.
I think for me, one thing that he brought up too that we didn't mention was that one of the other pilots only had 4 or 5 months under their belt, and it really, really did bother them for a long time. They wouldn't even talk about it. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a shock to them. They didn't know that was going on in the airspace. So it's hard to discredit that.
Yeah. So, for me, a dude with 24 years military service, 18 as a pilot, 5 tours to the Gulf, 4,000 flight hours, commanding officer of the Black Aces, flying around on 9/11. I'm going to give this dude, some leeway and say that what he's saying is, if nothing else, at least worth investigating at some kind of deeper level.
Yeah, I agree with that. The investigative part, sure. But again, man, I'm all in on this. So, I think that this is got some credence to it. I think, with all the evidence, all the stuff that you discussed over the time here, I have no reason to not believe it.
So let's wrap it up with my favorite part of these now. What do you think David Fravor's drink of choice is?
Scotch.
Scotch guy. Okay, Tyler, what do you think?
That's what I was thinking. I think he probably kicks it with some Wellers or some type of nice bourbon.
Okay, I'm putting Fravor as a gin and tonic guy.
Ooh. Look again.
Yeah, class it up a little bit.
Yeah, or he could just be straight like tea, no sugar. Doesn't want to, he's got to keep his body in impeccable order for his milk, in case he has to jump in a jet again.
Right, you never know.
Never know. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit that like and download the episodes. Until next time, I'm Mike.
I'm Brian. Keep your mind open and your eyes on the sky. You never know what's going to fly by.
And with that, we'll see you on the next one.